Chris Lee and Blaine Gilmer of Southeastern 14 here to preview the national championship game on January the 9th. Blaine, Georgia being here was foreseeable. The Bulldogs had won the national title last year, lost 15 guys to the NFL, but also returned some pretty good dudes too. TCU was unranked in preseason, but rolled through with an undefeated regular season in a really good Big 12. Now they're here, both played very exciting, high-scoring games in the semis, and I can't wait to see how this one unfolds in LA.
Yeah, when it comes down to it, you're talking about a Georgia team that, like you said, it was more likely that they would get here. But even so, Chris, with the 15 guys drafted in the NFL that you mentioned, I think people thought that Georgia would take a little step back this year, and then that Alabama would probably be the preeminent power to make it out of the SEC and get in there. But Georgia has proved resilient, and then TCU has been the epitome of toughness and resiliency. Comeback win after comeback win. Max Duggan wasn't even the starter for TCU when this year began. Him and Stetson Bennett both become Heisman Trophy finalists. Max Duggan actually finished second to Caleb Williams out there at USC in the Heisman Trophy voting. So there is going to be a lot of excitement. There's first-round talent across the board in this one. Jalen Carter for Georgia could end up being the first overall pick in the draft. You got Quenton Johnson, who's could be the first wide receiver taken in the draft for TCU. So lots of talent, and it's going to be a fun ending to what has been a wild college football season.
Let's make this clear. We're doing this on Monday evening. The teams have press conferences Tuesday. There are still a number of players about whom we do not know their availability on both sides. Blaine, we'll do a live stream sometime later this week, potentially Wednesday night, where we'll talk a little bit more. But just give us a rundown of who is in question for this game and what that might mean.
Yeah, on the TCU side, the main and most important injury is Keandre Miller, their running back. He went out and left the game, did not return later on in the second half with a knee injury, right knee injury versus Michigan. He is, their leading rusher by a long shot. Him and then of course Max Duggan actually, has a lot to do in their run game as well. But he's a guy that they really like to. They're explosive in the passing game, and they have that air raid style attack with Riley over there. Garrett Riley is their OC. But when it comes down to it, they like to be able to take advantage of spreading people out formationally, get them going sideline to sideline with some of those quick screens and passing game, and then hammering Keandre Miller up in there. So that's a guy that could be a big loss if he's not able to play their lead running back. And then for Georgia, the biggest attention getter that got hurt in that matchup would have to be Darnell Washington, tight end for Georgia. And the reason I say that is because people don't realize, well, it's a tight end. It's a little bit different when this tight end is 6'8", 285 pounds, depending on what he ate for breakfast that day. And he's really a road grader in terms of the run game and a mismatch passing wise. Now, there were some other things that Georgia's got to look at. Lad McConkey, he played, but he wasn't 100%. Michael Williams goes down, an outside linebacker for him, and defensive end hybrid type player, Chaz Chambliss. I think they seem to feel that those two guys have a chance to play based on what we're hearing. But Darnell Washington and Keandre Miller are two of the big injury reports that we'll need to look at throughout the week. And like I said, we'll update on our live streams and things like that.
All right, Blaine, let's preview each side of the matchup here, starting with TCU's offense. Compared with Georgia's defense, TCU averaged 41.4 points a game this year. Georgia allowed 14.8. TCU lost 7 fumbles. Georgia recovered 6. TCU lost 6 interceptions. Georgia made 10. So TCU pretty good about hanging on to the ball. Georgia not a great team at forcing turnovers. That's not really what the Bulldogs do. Let's talk about running plays. And a running play would include or would not include a sack, because a sack is a pass play that just went wrong. TCU this year was pretty balanced. It averaged 37 rushing plays a game. to 33 pass plays. Against Georgia, teams attempted, 24 rushing plays and 37 passing plays. That by virtue, I'm sure, a lot of being behind. Per rushing play, TCU averaged a very healthy 5.9, and Georgia gave up just 3.8 per passing play. TCU averaged 7.9 yards. Georgia, Blaine, as much as that defense and that secondary was maligned at times and had struggles against Ohio State, still an average of just 5.7 yards allowed per pass play this season, which is really good.
Yeah, and there have been times during the year, as you pointed out, where Georgia's defense has given up yardage at different points in times. But it seems like when stops are needed, and if you go look at that fourth quarter, Georgia outscored Ohio State 18-3. They got the stops when they needed them there at the end. So that's a big thing there. The same thing could be said for TCU's defense when we talk about them as well. But right now, talking about TCU's offense, it all goes through Max Duggan. I know I've talked about Keandre Miller and his 1,400 yards rushing. If they don't have him, they have DeMercado that came in and did a good job, average 8.8 yards per carry, actually against a very stout Michigan team in that Fiesta Bowl. So I think that will be something to look at, like I said, on the injury front there. But Max Duggan, people underestimate his mobility, his athletic ability. He really can get out and run. We've seen long touchdown runs from him, whether it was Oklahoma earlier this year. He really was one of his first ones that he get out and kind of caught everybody's attention. He had that wonderful drive against Kansas State where he almost willed his team to a victory in the Big 12 championship game. And then, of course, he had some good runs against Michigan as well. So when it comes down to it, Max Duggan's legs will be a big factor in this one. And then, of course, Quenton Johnson, he gets the overwhelming majority of their targets. He's got 59 receptions on the year, Chris, and the next on their team, when it comes down to it, is 37 with Darius Davis. So he gets the lion's share of the targets, and for good reason. I mean, he's a big, rangy receiver and has tremendous speed. He's going to be a first-round NFL talent. And Keely Ringo, I'm sure, will be matched up on him a lot, as he was with Marvin Harrison Jr. for Ohio State. So Georgia, as you mentioned, not a big turnover team and not a big sack team. And that's not something you see typically for a team that is in the college football playoff national championship game, Chris. Usually it's very disruptive, but this has been a more bend, don't break type style of defense for Georgia. They bog people down in the red zone, and that'll be the interesting matchup there. There's been a couple of times where TCU has had some issues down by the goal line, ideally, or most notably that Kansas State game where they got stopped short on a fourth down stop. So it will be interesting to see kind of the strengths of these two teams, because Georgia has struggled at times, and Kirby Smart defenses, much like Nick Saban defenses at Alabama, have struggled with mobile quarterbacks, and Max Duggan is the epitome of a mobile quarterback.
Yeah, two things. Let's start with Duggan, because this year he gained 683 yards rushing. Now, he lost 222, so that 683 is not the net, but that's a good number to look at, because most of the loss is going to be on sacks, which is probably on his offensive line more than it's on him. Point is that he's very mobile, as you pointed out. You said Georgia's not a sack team, and mostly that's not been true, but you have seen Georgia dial it up at times when it needed. I'm thinking of the Tennessee game and how it handled Hendon Hooker, and I don't remember how many sacks the Dogs got that day. Was it six? Well, and it wasn't. It seemed like they had like 89 pressures on top of that. So, point being here, Georgia can play that game when it needs to. Its front seven is as athletic as anybody's in the country, and I'm very curious how the Bulldogs attack TCU and Max Duggan, given that.
They are, but I would argue that TCU's offensive line is much better than Tennessee's offensive line. Honestly, I think TCU has big offensive linemen that are physical at the point of attack. People like to misconstrue the air raid with Sonny Dykes, what he's done in the past, and and also Garrett Riley and what he, done with, of course, his brother Lincoln being out there at USC, they like to misconstrue, okay, air raid with lack of physicality. That is certainly not the case with TCU. Max Duggan is as tough as a pine knot, as my grandfather used to say. He is as tough as they come, and I think that offense kind of takes on his personality and his leadership, and those big guys up front enjoy running the football. That's why I think Keandre Miller and his availability in this game will be huge, because while Georgia, you're not going to make a living lining up and trying to run the ball on Georgia, but you cannot, Chris, you cannot become one-dimensional, because when you do become one-dimensional, like Tennessee did in that game earlier this year, that is when Georgia can get those sacks and pressures, even though they haven't really, that hasn't been what they've been hung their hat on this year. They've hung their hat on being a stifling defense in the red zone and just not letting you finish drives. But they can also create havoc if they know that they don't have to worry about the run game. It'll be incumbent upon TCU to get something going, so Georgia at least has to honor the run game in the early downs.
Now, if I'm Kirby Smart, I might be having some nightmares about Quenton Johnson, because he looks so good against Michigan's outstanding defense. He's 6'4", 215. He's had a 200-yard game earlier in the year. I assume Keely Ringo gets the assignment there. I don't know how they'll play it, but that's one area where I think TCU could certainly give Georgia some troubles, which I think he could give anybody some troubles, to be fair.
Oh yeah, I mean, like I said, he's going to be a first-round NFL draft pick. I mean, he's that kind of talent at receiver. And here's the thing. Georgia won't necessarily flip-flop guys around. They don't do that. Kamari Laster will be on him at times. Javon Bullard will be on him at times. Keely Ringo will be on him at times. He may get matched up with the safety, and Malachi Starks end up on him. They'll move Quenton Johnson around, and as they should, to try to get those matchups, because Georgia can be had in the secondary, especially if they're not getting pressure up front. But that's really going to be the key there. How many does Georgia have to bring to get pressure on Max Duggan? And then also, how many will they bring and how many will they leave as a spy? I can imagine you can see Smile Munden play that spy role a lot, him and Jalen Walker, as they did earlier this year against Hendon Hooker, because they knew Hendon Hooker had the legs to run, the same as was done against Bo Nix. I would honestly say that Georgia's preparation for this TCU team will probably be very similar to how they prepared for that Oregon team with Kenny Dillingham's offense. Very, like to run the football, like to spread you out, like to get the quick screens going, and that's what TCU likes to do. But TCU, I think, of course, has a tremendous offensive line, as I pointed out, and that they have a weapon out there with Quenton Johnson that they can take advantage of. Tay Barber, also another talented receiver, and then of course Max Duggan's legs. But I think Georgia, knowing that they're going into this game with a running quarterback, I think you'll see some different things coverage wise and some different things in terms of how their front and linebackers play in terms of spying Max Duggan and how they design that rush.
Let's say, just for the sake of this and not knowing, DeMercado's the guy instead of Miller. I mean, he runs it 17 times for $150 against Michigan. Stats for the year, I mean, and Miller's the starter for a reason, right? They think he's their best back, but average per carry, not much different. Miller 6.2, DeMercado 5.8. I wonder how much difference that makes against Georgia if he is hobbled or not available.
Keandre Miller is just a guy. I mean, he just has he just has a different gear. And when it comes to speed, when it comes to the ability to make people miss. So, he's just, like you said, he's their starter for a reason. But DeMercado acquitted himself quite nicely against a very good. Let's not get it mistaken. He had some big runs and some big gains against a Michigan team that is known for being a stout run defense. So I think that has to give TCU some confidence that they will be able to run the football, whichever running back. But that's going to be the key to this one, in my opinion. Can TCU get that? I think they need to be able to average, close to 4 yards a carry. You don't have to get that average up there, 5, 6, 7 yards at a kind of they would love that. Of course, TCU would. But if you can average 4 yards a rush and make Georgia, have to really honor that run game, then I think that just gives Max Duggan and Quenton Johnson that much more opportunity to have success.
All right, before we talk about the other side of the matchup, a quick word from our sponsor, Stakes. Predict sports better than the crowd for a chance to win NFTs. With Stakes, players can cement their sports predictions against friends, other fans, and influencers forever. Don't let your sports genius go overlooked. Join Stakes and have the best predictions captured in the moment. Go to playwithstakes.com/14. Use our invite code Southeastern14 for a double welcome bonus. That's a predictions app. We'll be putting several questions in there. Fun place to be. Help out those who help our channel. All right, Blaine. Next up is the Georgia offense. Stetson Bennett was just tremendous down the stretch, making the big plays that needed to be made in Georgia's win to get it here. Of course, you saw the same thing last year when Stetson Bennett beat Alabama. So that'll be a huge thing to watch. When the Bulldogs have the ball, they are scoring 39.4 points a game. TCU giving up 26.4. Georgia has lost 10 fumbles and 7 interceptions. TCU has recovered 6 fumbles and had 16 picks. TCU gets a decent number of sacks, 30, which is exactly what Georgia has. But Georgia's offensive line, Blaine, just doesn't give them up. It's given up 9 on the year and had not given one up between the Vanderbilt game, which was back in October, and the championship game. Finally gave one up, and that one to Ohio State. So
they went 6 games without giving one up before that sack with Ohio State.
By the way, did we talk about McClendon? Because I don't think we did.
McClendon dressed out for that game, and he was available to play. But when you got a 5-star in Amarius Mims, that's probably going to be your starting right tackle. I think they felt comfortable with him getting he got most of the reps. Now, McClendon's an All-American. And if he is available to play, I'm sure Georgia will be happy to have him in there as well. But you got to wonder with, it might be one of those things, if it's not broke, don't fix it type deal. Just have McClendon there. But Amarius Mims certainly playing well. And he's a guy that Georgia is going to be looking forward next year to really anchoring. He may even move over to left tackle. They're looking for him to anchor that offensive line next year. So, Georgia should be good there. But as you mentioned, Stetson Bennett has just cemented himself as a legend, like an all-time legend in Georgia, regardless of what happens in this game, with the performances that he's had in SEC championship games and college football playoff games, whether it was Michigan last year, Alabama last year, and now Ohio State this year. Seemingly, Stetson Bennett, he's played his best football then, and he's been the most outstanding player offensively in all 3 of those games for Georgia. So, I know that as much as we talked about Georgia having to worry about TCU, literally nearly all the same things can be said about Stetson Bennett. He is mobile. He can hurt you with his legs. He doesn't do it quite as much as Max Duggan. And also he can put the ball on the money when it counts in the fourth quarter, has total command of that offense. Todd Monken lets him have free reign. I mean, he has the ability to check any play he wants, to check the runs, to change protections at the line of scrimmage. He has full command of it, and I think that he's getting some weapons back, even though Darnell Washington is a key piece that could be out, like we said, with an ankle injury.
Plenty more.
Yeah, they did get A.D. Mitchell back, and we saw how big that was. A.D. Mitchell, the number 1 receiver that they had not had since the Samford game, all the way back to the second game of the season. Having him back, well, they had him in the SEC championship game in a limited role, but having him back full speed in this game, catching the game-winning touchdown pass, in fact, he's a guy that, like Quenton Johnson, next year he's got another year where he's going to have to come back before he's draft eligible. He could end up being a guy that's a first-round type draft pick. And then we saw the emergence of Arian Smith, who has 100-meter speed, runs a verified 4.240 time, and absolutely left one of the Ohio State defenders high and dry. So listen, TCU plays that 3-3-5 defense. They like to get in that stack and use multiple stunts, whether it's run blitzes. Winners played a unbelievable game against Michigan. They played a team in Michigan that has a really good running back in Donovan Edwards, and they have JJ McCarthy. But I would at this point think that this is going to be the best team offensively that TCU has played. Stetson Bennett and that offensive line are just totally dialed in. Like I said, those weapons are there. Brock Bowers, Keandre Jackson made a big catch in his last, second to last game for Georgia here. This will be his last game as a senior going out. So, and then the stable of running backs that Georgia has with Kenny McIntosh and Kendall Milton and then Dejan Edwards. So there's a lot to handle there. But like I said, when it comes to this TCU defense, not the metrics, the numbers aren't always great, in terms of giving up points at different times throughout the year to Oklahoma State, giving up points, a lot of points and yardage to a Baylor in a game and almost losing that. But they find ways to win ball games, and they do it by kind of the same method as Georgia, bend, not break. They get the stops when they need to. Can they force Stetson Bennett to turn the ball over multiple times? Like Ohio State got him to do it once, and that's because of her pressure. And everybody knows Stetson Bennett, he's not the tallest in the world. So if you are able to push that pocket a little bit, which it's rare for the Georgia offensive line, if you are able to push that pocket, sometimes he can't see as good, and he's apt to make a mistake or two throughout the game. Can TCU be opportunistic on that? They had 2 pick sixes against Michigan. So that's being efficient with those opportunities, Chris. So I think it's going to be a fascinating matchup. But the thing about it is, I need to see TCU stand up and say, Georgia, you're not going to run the football in that first quarter and a half of this game to really kind of set the tempo there, because there were games this year, whether it was the Kansas game, Kansas had 189 yards rushing, Texas A&M, another 189-yard rushing, Baylor, 232 yards rushing on them, and Kansas State, 205. Even Michigan had 186. If Georgia can get anywhere close to that amount, then with the play action game and what they're able to do with Brock Bowers, A.D. Mitchell, Lad McConkey, all these guys out on the edge, it'll be a very productive night, and it'll be Max Duggan in that offense having to be in a track meet with Georgia, much as Ohio State was, and that'll be a tough feat for anybody with Georgia's defense. But listen, TCU's defense has been opportunistic. Can they be consistent enough in this national championship game for 60 minutes?
Yeah, a few things here. The Big 12 may be the best offensive league in the country. So a lot of defenses aren't going to put up spectacular numbers against that competition. I thought your point was well made there. And the turnovers is where I have a little bit of question, because Stetson Bennett will throw a bad ball or two a game. We've seen that at times, although he does seem to get his head screwed on right, or whatever the phrase you're looking for when it really matters at the end. But a couple other numbers we didn't get to is Georgia is giving up, Georgia's averaging 5.7 yards per rush play, and the Horned Frogs giving up 4.8. Georgia averaging 8.5 yards a pass. TCU giving up 6.2, which is very respectable. Great numbers on both sides there. And Georgia, just FYI, averages 36 rush plays a game and 34 pass plays. That is about as balanced as you can get.
Yeah, they have and a lot of that too, Chris, was because of how Georgia's game flow went throughout the year. A lot of times they really came out firing the ball and passing a lot more early in games, but then they get up and they run the ball to kind of melt things away in the second half. You've seen here in the SEC championship and in the playoff game against Ohio State, Todd Monken is not afraid to come out and start slinging the football around, and he believes in what Stetson Bennett can do. So I'm excited to see Max Duggan, Stetson Bennett, the 2 great stories there, Sonny Dykes, Kirby Smart, just all the storylines, even Timon Mitchell, who was a Georgia Bulldog, who's now a key player on the defense for TCU that transferred in this past offseason. So listen, I'm excited to see all of these storylines, and you got Georgia a 12.5 point favorite, over under 62.5. What do you think about those numbers, Chris?
Well, I'm going to give you some thoughts, but we need a word quickly from our other partners. Brothrow. If you don't like betting $11 to win $10, this is the place for you. You can bet in all 50 states. Because Brothrow isn't the house, bettors have a fair chance at winning. It's the only sports betting platform that doesn't take a cut of every bet. There's no deposit money needed into a Brothrow account. Don't have to do that. So there's no deposits, no minimum bets, no need to connect your bank account. Bettors pay each other directly. It's a hassle-free sign-up process that lets you get in the action in seconds. Go to brothrow.com/SE14. You'll see that on a ticker and probably in our description too. And once you get there, ask to join our Southeastern 14 group. We'll have some fun with that. We're just getting that started. Got a few dozen people in there already. So we can have our own little private group where we can get to have some fun and win and lose some money. All right, Blaine, I always like to go over the miscellaneous stuff right before we make picks. TCU has been penalized for 50 yards a game. Georgia has been penalized 46, so not a big advantage there. TCU's special teams, according to FEI, I think this is before this weekend's games, TCU rated 11th in the country in special teams. Georgia ranked 48. Strength of schedule, TCU 10 according to ESPN's FPI. Georgia 18 by that same metric. The line and over-under is we're doing this Monday night. We're seeing 12.5 in Georgia's favor, 62.5 in the over-under. That gives you a predicted final score of something along the lines of 38-25 Georgia's favor. And the over-under, based on what the teams did this year, Blaine, was 61 in terms of what they averaged. So interesting that the over-under about a 1.5 higher than what the teams actually did. But then again, my goodness, the way these teams have been scoring points in the playoffs and giving them up, you wonder if the over might not be the play there.
Yeah, I think it's going to be, man, it's just going to be so difficult to really just stone cold stop either one of these offenses, I believe, especially with some banged up on Georgia's side of the ball, with a lot at one position. At one point, Michael Williams, Robert Bill, Chaz Chambliss, all were down at outside linebacker. So it's, can they get that pressure like we talked about on Max Duggan? I think the offenses will be successful. Like you said, I would tend to lean the over on this one. And also 12.5 points in a national championship game is just a lot. But you got to give a lot of credit to Kirby Smart and this program for getting to the point where they would be considered a 12.5 point favorite in a national championship game. I mean, that's unfathomable. If you look back to 2016, January of 2016, when these two teams played in the AutoZone Liberty Bowl, when they played each other back in 2016 and Georgia wins 31-23, I don't think you could have said, hey, we're going to fast forward 7 years from now, and you two teams are going to be playing in the national championship game against each other. I don't think anybody would have believed that for either program. So football changes quickly, and it changes. It's just one of the most fun sports to watch, especially college football with all the different dynamics of it now. I like Georgia to win this game. I would pick TCU to cover the 12.5. I would pick TCU to cover unless it got all the way down below 8.5. I would probably pick TCU to cover that, and I'm probably going to go the over as well.
Yeah, that's how I feel too. I feel like 12.5 is a lot. I think Georgia will win the game, but based on what we've seen so far, and let's be honest, LSU put some yards on Georgia too, although circumstances were a little different. So I'm with you on that. By the way, 2016, I believe that was Kirby Smart's first year. Am I right on that?
It was the 2015 season, but they played the game in January of 2016, the Liberty Bowl. So, Kirby Smart got the best of then the TCU team coached by Gary Patterson. But now you got to say, and the job that Sonny Dykes did coming in, replacing a legend, because people shouldn't mistake it. Gary Patterson's a legend for what he did at TCU, Andy Dalton, all those guys. So to be able to remake the roster and kind of not redo the culture, but put his own stamp on the culture in this amount of time, and then have everything break the way it did with Max Duggan after the injury to Chandler Morris. It's just a great story, and it's going to be a great national championship.
Yeah, I've been to games in both venues. They're both outstanding places to be. And best of luck to both teams. If you like this video, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the like button. We preview SEC football, baseball, and basketball. We are going to have previews on every single game involving SEC teams in basketball. We've got some up on the channel this morning. We'll have some more coming up Tuesday morning, and we'll be doing live streams about hoops, and we'll probably do one on this game between now and when it's played. We'll let you know ahead of time, just based on our schedules. Anyway, thank you for watching Southeastern 14 presented by Stakes. We'll see you again soon.